Hey guys, it's Simon here with Hobbies and Man once again, and today we're doing another episode of the Book Chatter series that I have on the channel. So Book Chatter is basically a conversation that deals with a book series that I'm reading, and it's mostly about topics that I either didn't cover in the videos that I did covering the series, right, like each book individually, or it's about stuff that I thought was interesting and I want to talk about some more, right? So this is kind of like an extra episode relating to something that I've covered before, right? In this case, we're covering Battle Mage Farmer by Seth, who I have reviewed quite a few books for. I think there's 4 of them so far, and there should be more in the future. And Battle Mage Farmer has 9 books total. The last one I think came out literally last year, at the end of last year. There is also a light novel adaptation of this by Vault Comics. Although I don't know if that's available yet. I reached out to Vault and asked them, hey, can I have a physical copy of the light novel, right? It fits into my channel, and I like Seth Ring's work. They never answered, so I guess that's just kind of, just how it goes sometimes. But maybe in the future they will. I'm not really sure. And I'm talking about this series after having read the first 3 volumes, right? Or the first 3 books in the series, right? So that would be Domestication, Germination, and Cultivation, I think is what the 3 first books are called. It's a orange cover, a blue cover, and then a kind of greenish cover, right? And this is basically the first arc of the story. I mean, there's 9 volumes, and these first 3 kind of have like a self-contained story, so I would assume that that's continuing on further from here, right? And so I read the first 3 books, and I thought, okay, this is a perfect ending to like a portion of the story. This is the right moment to talk about it, right? So that's why we're here. But before we get into any of the deeper topics, I did want to talk about the kind of vibe of the story or the inspiration of the story, right? And I guess before that, I have to kind of tell you what the story is about, right? So Battle Mage Farmer, of course, is about a farmer who happens to be a battle mage, right? And so we have our character, his name is John Sutton, and he has a mysterious past initially, right? And we do reveal what the past is by the end of the 3rd book, right? He is the hero of the world who happens to also basically be the Dark Lord of the world because of the way in which he developed his powers, right? So he is the eternal flame. He is this character that kind of became modern mythology due to the wars that were happening in this world after he was summoned in from our Earth, right? And so he becomes the Eternal Flame through his time working as this warrior for the cause or whatever. He gains notoriety, develops his powers of this like light blue flame, and he ends up becoming kind of the leader of a religious organization called the Ecclesia, right? And so at some point he decides that he's done with all of this, right? The Ecclesia has set up itself. It is the ruling parliament, I guess, of the country that he's from, and he decided that he's done, and so he leaves. And that's when our story starts, actually. So he starts by getting a land deed, and then making his way to this edge of the world, this kind of like region in the boonies, where he's going to set up his farm, right? And he actually took over the farm of a family that had died. And when he arrives, he realizes that there's people in his house, and that there's something weird with this village, right? Like there's nothing wrong with the village per se, but the village is set up in such a way that it's a bit different from what he expected, right? So he makes it to his new house. He sees that there's a young lady and a young boy there, and that they're being harassed by these guys, right? And these guys happen to work for this guy called the Wolf King, Haver, and he starts his adventure from there, right? And so he cleans out the bandits. He develops his farm, and he starts making cheese because he is, I'm guessing, from Wisconsin or something. He was a person that was on Earth. He had a difficult life, and then he ended up being a cheese cheese producer with his aunt and his family members. And he knows how to make cheese, right? And so he develops his farm. He creates cheese, which apparently this world has not really developed properly yet. And so he decides to develop this export business of cheese. And then he gets embroiled in other stuff. He ends up meeting with a bunch of different people across the country, and then goes on a journey to find, basically ancient repository of knowledge and, all of this stuff, right? And then by the end of the first set of books, the end of the arc, he realizes that he needs to leave this world and move on to the next one, right? And so this is where the transition occurs between this Earth arc and the next one, right? And I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great. I mean, I skipped over a lot of interesting stuff, but I really, really like it, especially after reading the first book. Getting into the second book, you really develop a taste and an enjoyment of this series, right? Because the vibe and the inspiration seem to be Western novels in some cases, right? Or in some kind of way, this kind of weird tales, Western type of situation thing, right? So I wonder if Seth Ring is a big fan of Robert E. Howard, right? So in terms of the vibe of the original setup of the story, Battle Mage Farmer feels like a magic Western, and specifically it feels like Hondo by Louis L'Amour. Now, I do have to talk a little bit about this book, right? So Hondo was originally made as a movie script, and then Louis L'Amour, who made the movie script, decided to turn it into a novel. And this is not necessarily the start of his career, because he was a pretty good, Western novelist at this time, but he definitely gained some popularity from this, right? And so Hondo is one of his classic novels. As you guys can see, this is The Lost Treasures. And in this one, they talk about the fact that Hondo is this like etched man, this man that is big and broad-shouldered, and he has kind of a deep knowledge of the way of the Apache, or the Native Americans of the area. And as he's kind of moving through this western region of the world in Arizona, he ends up meeting with this woman called Angie Lo, and this warrior Vitoro. Vitoro is the leader of the Apache tribe that's currently in charge, and they're trying to set up a war against the white men, right? And he kind of becomes embroiled in this relationship between Vitoro, and also with this relationship with Angie Lo, who is a young woman who's raising a young boy by herself in this ranch, right? And so now he's kind of caught between these things, right? He needs to save people. He needs to deal with these Native Americans, and he also has to develop his relationship and protect this woman that he's kind of fallen in love with, right? And if you stretch that story out and you change some of the stuff, that's basically what you get out of the first 3 books here in this series. And I actually love that. I think it's really cool to have something like this classic, old school, true American style storytelling, which is the Western, and turning it into a magical cultivation type series. I really love that. I think that's, very inspired, very well done. And I also like that the initial kind of setup beyond this, the way the relationship that kind of develops between Ellie, who is the female character in Battle Mage Farmer, and John, also has a relationship to Robert E. Howard's Solomon Kane character, right? So the first Solomon Kane story, or actually maybe the most important Solomon Kane story, depending on how you look at it, is probably the story called The Red Shadows, right? And The Red Shadows starts with the coming of Solomon, right? And in this one, Solomon Kane comes across a young woman who is, deeply hurt, and it seems like maybe she was raped or something. And he talks to her, he holds her hand as she dies, and he gets information out of her, right? And he encounters this character called Le Loup, or the wolf in French, right? And so as this woman dies, and because Solomon Kane is a bit like a weird, positive, good guy psychopath, he vows revenge on this innocent soul, and so he chases Le Loup across the world, right? And so he ends up kind of meeting him in a bunch of different areas, and then eventually comes across him in a mountain region where he was kind of initially set up, and then ends up finally destroying him in Africa, in the bowels of the jungle, right? And although the story doesn't happen the same way, John's interaction with Haber the Wolf King initially is quite similar. And so I really didn't cotton on to this fact until recently. I was looking back at some of the Solomon Kane stories, and I thought, oh shit, this is very similar, right? And I actually love that. I think it's cool. I really like the classic sword and sorcery-esque kind of stuff that comes out of Robert E. Howard, right? From the 1920s. This is, by definition, making Battle Mage Farmer like this true American kind of like cultivation novel, or lit RPG, or progression fantasy, whatever you want to call it. And I love that. I think it's really awesome, right? So that's kind of my thoughts on the kind of general basic inspiration here. That does transition us over to the second topic that I wanted to talk, which is the world building, right? And the kind of crux of this situation or this topic is that I really don't understand what version of progression fantasy this falls under. Like, is it technically a game because John has like a a status screen, or is it a cultivation story because he has to breathe a certain way in order to create his powers, or is it something else, right? John also has like a special voice at the back of his head that gives him information, right? Kind of like how a game menu usually does, right? And so it's kind of unclear. Like, yes, technically the most generic version of this is progression fantasy, right? But within the subgenres of progression fantasy, what is it? Is it game lit? Is it lit RPG? Is it cultivation? Is it wuxia? Is it xishan? What is the true definition here? And I think that there probably isn't one. Seth Ring is kind of making his own kind of like amalgam system, right? And I like that. I think it's cool. It's also kind of similar to later portions of Cradle, where the character technically does only do cultivation, but he has this added element of like a voice in his head, kind of like the menu system for like video games, right? And so it's interesting. I don't dislike it. I think in this case, Seth Ring is really taking an approach similar to Robert E. Howard, right? Which is, there's a bunch of different things that are interesting. Let's kind of combine them and kind of turn them into a like progressive, followable, or what's it called? Repeatable process to create these kind of special types of stories, right? Because he does this with Advent as well, right? Advent is a sci fantasy, but it's also military fiction, right? And so it has a lot of different things combined. And in this case, Battle Mage Farmer does as well, right? So it's kind of unclear, or it's kind of difficult in a certain sense for me to kind of be okay with this, because I like things having, titles and boxes and special kind of things in which they fit. But at the same time, lit RPG and progression fantasy is kind of like an emerging genre. And so there are going to be things that kind of don't really fall into the pre-established boxes that we imported from other countries, right? And so I get that. I don't necessarily know what to call this, though. I'll probably just stick to, Magic Western or, progression fantasy as more broad titles, because that's probably the easiest way to kind of define them. But I would like to know what Seth Ring really calls this series. Like, if he has to give it a genre name, what is the genre, right? Just for my own preferences, right? I find this objectionable in some cases, or in some to some level, but it's really unimportant, right? In the grand scheme of things, genres don't really matter. What matters is being able to get your book in front of audiences that are going to appreciate it, right? And that's what genres are supposed to do, but they don't really work that way, to be honest with you, most of the time. It's more of a concept necessary for publishers to know, okay, what are you selling me, right? More so than it is like, what am I giving to people, right? If that makes sense. But that's enough of that. In terms of other stuff that's related to world building, I actually really enjoy the intelligent races that are provided here. So there's 2 or 3, depending on how you want to qualify it. So there's humans, those are the baseline, intelligent races. And then there's specters, who are basically Dobby elves, right? They're kind of these small brownie looking guys, but they're kind of a little bit more dangerous. They're kind of like these fairy, kind of gnome-esque kind of little guys, but they're very sharp and they're very powerful. And they also clearly explain to John, hey, we're from a different world. We just ended up here because shit happens, right? I also quite like them because they remind me a lot of the Nox from Stargate. The Stargate series, there is an episode, I think it is just called the Nox, where SG-1 manages to go into this other planet. They realize that there is these magical beings here that can hide themselves, and they kind of have this like pale gray, kind of like leafy, hippie kind of vibe to them, and they are very pacifistic. Now, the Spectres aren't really pacifistic, but they have very similar vibes to the Nox from what I remember of the series, right? So I like that. I thought that was really cool. And it's also nice that they're paired off with the Grimm, which are basically white ape kind of Bigfoot characters. They're less intelligent than humans, but they're not necessarily dumb. They're kind of like nearly at the level of humanity. They just don't have the same kind of level in certain ways, right? But they're very cool and very interesting. And I quite like that. I like that the American feeling, cultivation novel has these two kind of like Midwestern or kind of like Pacific Northwest kind of feeling characters, right? The little grays, right? Kind of like something that you see out of Mount Rainier or, Area 51 and stuff like that. And you also have the Bigfoot characters, which are very popular in the Pacific Northwest kind of area of the world, right? So I think that's cool. I love that. I really, really enjoy that. And I also like the difference in the way they treat John. So the Grimm kind of revere John to an extent because he comes off as like this god character to them. And the Spectres kind of fear him because they know he's too powerful for this world. And so they're kind of unsure how to deal with him, right? So I like that. I think it's interesting that the two intelligent races besides humans are the ones that kind of define who this character is for humanity in some way, right? They kind of reflect the way in which humans can view John himself. So I like that. I think it's cool. The class system is also interesting because it kind of defines 5 master classes, right? So there's Mage, which is what John is. Warrior, which is just kind of a general like attacking thing. Then Ranger, which is a ranged attacker. A Rogue, which is a kind of like a cloak and dagger type character. And then a Witch, which is not the same as a Mage. A Mage defines the world, and a Witch asks the world for things, right? So this is kind of like a little bit like the power system in the Wheel of Time. So it's kind of different, and maybe in the larger kind of context you would think, okay, mages and witches are the same character, archetype or whatever, but they're different. They kind of deal with magic in different ways, and so I like that. I think it's cool, but I am interested in the concept of these 5 master like classes as a way of like defining what it means, right? So like, are they the pinnacle of their classes? So like technically a paladin is a derivation, right? It is derived from the warrior class, right? It is a warrior that happens to have like a religious reason for fighting, right? So does that mean that in order to become the best class, does he have to return back to warrior, or is warrior the baseline and then the specializations are more powerful? Like I'm curious about that, because although these classes are pretty simple and understandable, I don't understand how their power kind of defines itself compared to the classes that we do see in the Battle Mage Farmer world, right? So we see barbarians, we see like beast tamers, we see witches and stuff like this, and obviously Ellie is a powerful witch, John is the most powerful character alive and he's a mage, and then we have like paladins and rogues, and most of the rogues are just called rogues, but they're not really that powerful. It doesn't seem like they have special abilities for being like the master class, right? So what is the reality here? I'm kind of curious, right? And it's interesting that none of these have like secondary effects. Like all of these seem to be very straightforward. Like you don't have bards or anything, although the Spectres, being from another world, they actually do have a bard class, and it works within the Battle Mage Farmer world, but it's not transferable to humans, except for in a specific case, which is Ellie's younger brother, right? So I think that's really cool. I really enjoy this, and mostly I like the fact that it's simple, but the simplicity actually allows you to have a lot of questions about it, right? And I like the concept of multiple worlds, and then the mage entering this one is interesting, but a bit unclear. So it seems like the mage saw another human, race in a different dimension and decided to help them because, if I remember correctly, the way it's explained is that John was summoned to a world and he became too powerful. And then when he gets interactions with other mages that are powerful, it gets explained to him that the reason the mage showed up initially to this world was because monsters were overtaking it, right? And he needed to help humanity fight them off, right? But why? And why would this mage have this interest in this human race, that he sees through, a different dimension that isn't related to him at all, right? Like a human from a different dimension is not a human in the same way you and I are humans, right? They're humans, but they're not of this world, right? So are they really the same thing? Like, can you really feel empathy for them, right? It's kind of interesting because that is kind of like a quandary, right? And if we ever meet humanoids or other intelligent races, this is going to be something that we have to debate about, right? Like, do they count as human or not, right? I would say that if it was born on Earth, it is human, right? So if it's a Neanderthal, they are human. But is it, if it's like, you know, a mantis being or something, are they human? No. But are they still sentient? Yes, right? And what does that mean? And so I just, it's unclear the motivations of the mage. Like, why does he care about this world? Like, is there some sort of kind of issue like in Cradle where you have to have humans in order to have, you know, chaos define itself into order? Or like, what is the issue, right? I think that wasn't clearly explained to us. And so I didn't really understand why the mage initially came. But I like that he did, because that lets the story happen, right? And then the other system is the Doom Points, right? And so the Doom Points eventually transition over to being Apocalypse Points, right? At the end of the book, at the end of book 3. But what does that mean? And actually, I had problems with the Doom Points system a lot, because, so the Doom Point system is like, the more John develops himself, the more he cultivates his body and his abilities, the more mana of the world he purifies, right? And if the world gets too pure, humans cannot exist on it, right? And so that's what the Doom Points is, right? The Doom Points is a calculation of how much purity there is in the world. And every time that John uses his powers, you know, a lot, he defines the purity of the world, you know, he refines it. And so he makes it more pure. But that is not really explained to us until basically the 3rd book. And at that point, it's just annoying to have figured it out, because it doesn't really make sense in the broad scheme of things, right? Like, it's not like Doom Points went up every time he cultivated, right? They only went up when he used his abilities. And so it's actually not really about him defining or refining the world, making it more pure. It's about him, like, releasing his pure mana. And that's not really how it was explained, right? And so I didn't really like the Doom Point system, because it's unclear and it's kind of just vague, and also not really like defeatable. Like, you can't go against the Doom Point system, because John would have to stop using his magic and kind of, you know, limiting himself, which is what he does, right? He is an OP character that has a chain around him that forces him to not use his powers to the fullest, right? So I like the application in that sense, right? Allowing us to have an OP character that also has limitations, but the world building aspect doesn't make too much sense to me. Like, I don't think it really was clear and actionable as a system, right? I feel like it was just very vague and it wasn't clear. Although the way that they tried to combat it by having Ellie and John be at peace was nice. I like that. I thought it was cute, especially because it adds like a lot of sweetness to their relationship, but it just was not a good system in my opinion. There could have been something else, right? That could have been done, but it is what it is. Mostly the issue is that it takes too long to understand what it is, more so than anything else. So yeah, but that kind of brings us to our last topic here, which is character work, right? So I really like John and Ellie's relationship. I think it's good. I like that it's kind of modeled after Hondo, where it's like, if you read Hondo and then you read Battle Mage Farmer, you could kind of imagine that it's the same story, right? At the end of Hondo, Hondo and Angie Lo move on to somewhere kind of east of where he lived, or maybe actually west. I can't remember if they go to California or Texas. I think they go to California, where Hondo has a farm, right? And so he takes the woman with him, right? And so at a certain point, you can kind of assume that Hondo is John, right? And Angie is Ellie. And so you can read Hondo and then read this and kind of feel like the same characters are transitioning over to their sedentary, peaceful life, right? And then it kind of goes to shit because they have to deal with the fantasy story. So I like that. I think it's cool. I enjoy John and Ellie's relationship because it's really sweet and gentle and loving. And it's very slow, but very honest and real. And it feels like, you know, these characters would fall in love with each other in this way, right? And of course, John initially does have some very easy understanding that he might like this girl. But it's not so like in your face, right? Like, it's not like she's immediately described as like the supermodel hotness girl. She's described as like, you know, someone that clearly hasn't eaten well in a long time, and she kind of has this girl next door kind of vibe to her. And then as she becomes healthier and she develops her magic and stuff like this and her power, she gains more beauty and kind of becomes more radiant. And also because she is like a balm to John's soul, that's what really he finds attractive about her. It's not really about her physical beauty. It's about her beauty of self, right? Of her inner workings and the way that she balances out John. And I love that. I think that's really, really nicely done. So I really enjoy that. I also really like the Ferdinand and Sigvaldi characters. So Ferdinand is the bull that you see in the cover, and Sigvaldi is a rooster. And due to this weird situation, they end up gaining sentience, right? And so they become partners to John and Ellie, right? And so we have other characters in the farm. We have Ben, who is Ellie's younger brother, who's actually not her brother. He was adopted by her in some way, and so he's technically not her brother, but also not young enough to be her child, and so he's kind of just in this limbo kind of situation. But he is essentially the son character for Ellie and John's mom and dad, right? And so John gets Ferdinand the bull, Ellie gets Sigvaldi the crow. Sorry, not the crow. He's a rooster. And so I wish Ben got a goat, right? Like those are the three basic farm animals. I think it'd be really fun if Ben got a crazy billy goat, because he's just a small kid, right? So he could ride on the goat, and it'd be kind of fun for him to do that, and then the specters to copy him, right, with other animals. So I really would love if Ben got himself an animal companion as well, and I think that the goat would be fun, right? Have you guys ever seen the third movie in the Hobbit series, the Battle of the Five Armies? When the dwarves show up, right, they have goats and they have these war pigs, right? And so I feel like Ben getting one of these characters and one of these animals as his animal companion would be really, really fun. I think a goat is better than a pig, just because there's more actionable abilities, right? Because he would have to get a boar instead of a pig, right? And they're not really farm animals, but a goat is, right? And a goat has horns and it has a lot of strength and speed and kind of climbing abilities, and so that kind of works well with the abilities that Ben has, which are not about straight mobility. They're kind of in the shadows, and his singing and stuff. I think it would work really, really nicely. I don't know if Seth Ring is gonna involve this or anything. I assume not, because Ben isn't really an important character for the vast majority of the three books that I'm talking about. He's kind of just there initially to make Ellie more sympathetic, and then he becomes a plot point later, but he doesn't end up being a main character, if that makes sense. So I don't think he'll get a goat partner, but I think it'd be really fun if he did, right? And there's also some character work that I don't really like, which is John's tendency to drag fights out early on in the books, right? Mostly when it's kind of a lot of mystery, right? Like a lot of the early book story or character work that John does is him developing himself as this kind of character that's good at fighting, but not amazing at it, right? And so a lot of times he kind of drags his fights out, and he does this purposefully, and you know that it's done purposefully, but you just don't know why. And most of the time it feels unnecessary or actually kind of counter to who he is as a person, because he kind of constantly tells Ben and other characters, when you fight to win and do it quickly. Don't let yourself be, overconfident and stuff, right? And John kind of does feel like he goes against that advice a lot early on in the book, especially as it becomes more relevant that he has to finish fights fast, right? And so I don't really like it, not really because of that reason, although hypocrisy in characters is not great. Hypocrisy in general is not great. I don't necessarily fault this, though, because he is trying to keep a cover, right? So he's acting that way on purpose. But the fact that it's unclear to readers is not good. I don't like that part, right? But of course, reading this more times, I will be able to understand better as it happens. And so it'll become less of an issue over time. But in the first reading, I really did feel kind of upset at the fact that he kept dragging fights, and it was clear that he was doing it, but we didn't understand why, because there was this mystery being built around John's character, right? So those are kind of my thoughts there. That's basically all I wanted to talk about here to kind of round out the ending of the first arc of the story. I will eventually start reading the next set of books, probably in June, or maybe May, actually, because in May I'll be out of town for the vast majority of it, and so reading is mostly going to be done digitally, and that's the only way I have Battle Mage Farmer, so I'll probably do that. And then June is June on the Range, which is when you focus on reading westerns or frontier type stories, and Battle Mage Farmer technically counts as one, so I think that that'd be a good set of readings for that. So I will eventually get around to that, to more of the series this year. I just don't know exactly when, right? But probably May and June. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed. What do you think about Battle Mage Farmer? What do you think about the stuff that I said? Let me know down below, and thank you guys so much for watching. See you guys later.